Hey, everyone. Welcome. It's Isaya. This is another one of Isaya's Inspiring Evenings podcast episodes. And this is part of a series that is called Exploring Relationship Red Flags with the amazing Rie Pearson. Hi, Rie.
Hello.
And this is episode 7. It's going to be a 9-episode series. And we're discussing the early warning signs of unhealthy relationship dynamics, the psychology behind red flag behaviors, and how we can interrupt said patterns before they escalate into harm. As all my episodes, these conversations happen live and are then shared in my podcast and anywhere else the guest, aka Rie, feels like sharing. Before we go into today's topic, I want to reintroduce Rie to everyone, so I'm going to read her bio. Rie Pearson lives overlooking the sea and describes herself as being on the edge. A police officer for 27 years with focus on policy and how the police deal with partner abuse. Oh, sorry, deals with partner abuse. Coma. Rie specializes in domestic abuse, stalking, and safeguarding. Her post-policing career has continued with directorships with several community interest companies, all focused on those specialisms. Rie's book, Be Kind, No Excuses, is a guide for teenagers and parents to raise awareness of the red flag behaviors that are a precursor to abusive behaviors in relationships. Her mission is to flip the discussions on violence against women and girls and talk about the real problem. The majority of abuse is being perpetrated by men who are violent towards others, women, men, and children. Be Kind, No Excuses is also now become a community interest company. And in this company, Rie has been co-creating WOW, Women Only Wellness Ltd. And WOW creates safe spaces for women and girls to come together and step into their own power through learning that self-care is not selfish. As I was saying, this is episode 7, and the title for this episode is Emotional and Psychological Abuse. Big topic. Because obviously, as we have been discussing before, abuse does not begin with the first hit or the first physical violence. It starts very often very long time before that, and emotional and psychological abuse is part of that. How would you define emotional abuse?
I think when you're with somebody who is determined to minimize you as a person,
Mm,
and so they do things that make you think, is it me?
mm,
Is it, because not a, if you're not an abusive person, the things that an abusive person does would be quite alarming to you. And I
mm-hmm,
think initially, certainly when I've spoken to people and in my personal experience, when somebody does something or says something that is meant to hurt,
mm-hmm,
you can't, you kind of think, did that really happen?
yeah,
Did that person really say, or did that person really do that thing that hurt my feelings? Because as a non abusive person, you wouldn't dream of doing such a thing. So it's quite shocking.
mm-hmm,
And then when you respond to that, depending on how you respond, depending on what that thing is, they criticize your response.
yeah, mm,
So you kind of sucker punched with
mm-hmm.
a shocking, hurtful thing. And then
And
it's
you
a
dare
double,
to say, I'm
you get it on the
hurt.
chin because they go, what are you talking about? It was just a
Mm-hmm,
joke, or I never said that, or I didn't mean it like that, or you're too sensitive. So
mm-hmm,
you get the 1-2 kind of thing.
mm-hmm.
Not actually physically, but the 1-2 sort of in an emotional
Yeah, and
way.
mm, and what
So
happens
you're
is
kind of
I'm
stunned.
guessing what happens is yeah, you stunned because you start then doubting yourself.
Yeah, because then they say, no, that's not what I meant. And you
Mm,
think, well, and they
that's
they
what you said.
minimize your emotions
Hmm.
to the point where eventually it gets to the point where you're not allowed to have any.
Hmm.
So they criticize your emotional reaction. You're laughing too loud. Why don't you laugh more? Smile more. Why are you so angry? Oh,
Mm,
if somebody did that to me, I'd be really angry. Why are you so calm?
mm,
And it's a constant. And I often think that abusive people must be very tired because it takes a lot of energy. It takes a
mhm.
lot of brain space to be that horrible, to actually do those negative things to somebody, to think in that way, to then, you know, do the things that you've been thinking. So, and it seems to me that they never miss an opportunity.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it
that's
doesn't
what
matter.
I'm hearing. And that the
I've
idea
just been
is,
talking. Sorry, go ahead.
for me, it's the I almost don't understand it. As in,
I don't
with
understand
my
it.
brain, kind of, it's like, how can someone spend so much time in just this constant desire to hurt somebody else? So that whatever they say or do has one goal and one goal only, which is reaffirm their superiority and their power over somebody else. And I'm
Yeah,
like, hmm, it kind of demands a lot of perseverance
totally.
and a
Yeah,
lot of
it's
hatred.
relentless.
Relentless, yeah. Mm,
And even when they're not being mean, you're waiting for them to be mean
yeah. Mm, uh,
because you know it's coming.
mm,
So you're always what they call walking on eggshells
yeah, that's
because they
the
will literally do the nice stuff,
mm.
and you think, oh, this is nice, and then they pull the rug by doing something
But there's
very,
always, whenever we talk, I end up with this, there's a double whammy. So we have an individual woman or girl who has been, going through her own shit in life, basically. And so she is predisposed or not to be accepting that shit, basically.
yeah.
And then we have society on top, which predisposes every woman to accept more shit than any man. So it's kind of if you've had the very much unlucky childhood where you've been already basically treated like shit,
Yeah,
when you grow up, since society is nowhere near to help to be on your corner, in your
yeah.
corner, then you're almost ready to consume by these assholes. Sorry.
I mean, we've talked previously about how family behavior affects what we accept.
Mm. Yeah.
So if you come from a family where abuse is a daily occurrence,
Mm.
how do you know anything else
Yeah.
in your formative years? Because I didn't realize until I was about 14, because my mum was really mean to my dad. And I went as a 14-year-old to a friend's house, and I couldn't believe how her parents were behaving because they were lovely to each other.
Hmm.
And that's, I didn't have experience of that.
Yeah. And there's no way you could have had
I couldn't
experience of
have.
that.
And then, so when your brain is developing, I mean, I'm not an expert on childhood brain development by any stretch of the imagination, but in your first 7 years, it's like
Hmm.
things, and then eventually you have these explosions of brain development at certain times in your life. So if you're in that cycle, at what point can you as a person individually, realistically, without support, break that cycle?
Well, yesterday, I'm going to a little tangent here, but I think you're going to find this interesting. I was talking with a friend who is a psychologist, and she was telling me that she recently read a research that proves that kids walk not learn to walk not as anyone learns to walk, but by watching the grown-ups who walk around them. So
Yeah.
if one of their parents has, for instance, a shorter leg or whatever or something, and has a particular way of walking, the child will then learn that way and that way only. Which
Wow.
means when they grow up, when they, turn 20 or something and their growth has finished, they now have the same physical defect, after walking for
That's
years.
incredible.
So they're literally copying what they see, not what their body tells them, what put one foot after the other, but they copy what they see. So imagine if that goes on for walking.
Wow.
How about what is a relationship? How do you show
Yeah.
love to someone? How do you tell somebody you love them or not? How do you
Or not.
support someone? So,
Yeah.
if something
It,
as basic as walking, we don't even
that's
as
incredible.
children learn from the inside out, but from the outside in, imagine for the rest. I was like
That's
floored by
wow.
this.
Yeah. I'd have to read that actually. That is just mad. Isn't that like terrifying?
A little bit, yeah.
But yeah, I think that you do learn. And then parents who stay together set that example. And then you've got well, people say, well, why didn't she leave? If
Mm,
it's a man and woman and she's the victim and he's the perpetrator, why doesn't she leave? Because it's not setting a good example for the children. And I'm like, well, why doesn't he just stop?
yeah, of course.
Nobody says, why doesn't he just stop? Because that's a choice, isn't it? And again, the way we twist things on planet patriarchy, it's her fault that her kids are in this cycle because she didn't leave.
Mhm.
Now, everybody listening, hands up. Who's got a spare house to move into? Who's got the financial means to do that?
Mhm.
Who wants to pull their kids out of the school that they're in, that they're enjoying,
Mhm.
and move across the other side of town or even another state or even another
Mhm.
country
Mhm.
um, to get away because a perpetrator will follow you?
Mhm.
I know a lady whose perpetrator followed her from Italy. I know another lady whose perpetrator followed
Wow.
her from one side of this country to the other side. I also know a lady who actually left and moved as far away as she possibly could without actually leaving the planet to get away from her perpetrator.
Mm.
Um, and still, like we see statistically, the risk of leaving a relationship with an abusive person, because it's actually at that moment where
Mm.
the abuse escalates, the risk
Yeah.
goes through the roof because the perpetrator, that emotional control is
Yeah.
being
The
taken
grip they
away.
have on you, on the victim is actually obviously loosening, so they're going to grab harder.
Yeah. So they hold on harder.
Mm.
And that's when the stalking starts and the windows go in and the car gets, somebody puts a tracker on your car when you're not looking. And that's why
Yeah,
people
and
who
all the
have businesses, they should make sure that people in their businesses are trained to understand these things, because I wonder how many businesses, well, I know there'll be millions, billions of pounds lost because of domestic abuse, but
mm,
nobody asks the question. They don't say, why are you off work? Oh, I had a poorly tummy. How have you
mm,
got a poorly tummy? That's not a question that's ever asked.
mm,
Because you're off work, because you're ill, you are
mm,
anxious, you are being abused, you are possibly being held hostage in your own home
mm,
because the abuser doesn't want you to go to work, or the
mm,
abusive person is outside waiting for you. I had a
mhm,
lady who worked at a very famous shop, a global store, whose perpetrator was stalking her. And I asked the store to change her shift pattern so she didn't have
mm,
to go home at night. I asked for a little while we got the case sorted and got him in jail, for her to have a shift change. And her manager said no. So I went to his manager and I said, you will change the shift so
mm,
she doesn't have to go home that late at night, because he will kill her and it will be all over the national news.
mm,
And your shop will be all over the
mm,
international news, and they
mm.
change the shift. But people in business tend not to understand, because
Of
nobody
course,
says you've lost
because
seven
it's not
billion pounds
comfortable.
this year
Because
because
it's
of
not
domestic
comfortable.
abuse,
No
because they
one
don't
wants
ask
to.
the question.
No one wants to have these conversations,
They
basically,
have to have these conversations. People are
publicly. I
dying.
mean, yeah, I know.
But if they did
Yeah.
ask the question and they knew how much money it was costing them,
Mm,
they
mm,
would
mm,
then do something about it,
mhm,
because
mm.
money is more important than people.
Yeah, toughly enough, sadly enough. But yeah,
Yeah.
so So we have, you know, is it always straight on mean, or can it be so subtle that it gets confusing for the victim, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, they call it coercive control, and it starts off under the radar, very insidious, and behaviors that look initially like they're caring, but
Mm,
actually are the beginning of controlling. Um, in my book, and lady number one, she had met this guy. She's the only adult in the book,
mm,
right? The rest of them are
mhm,
teenagers. Um, but she had met this guy in a bar. She really found him very attractive, and she was a very busy lady. She's a businesswoman, and she had a lot of work on. So he said, is it all right if I give you a ring? They exchanged telephone numbers, and yeah, and she said, but look, can you please leave it until Wednesday because I am absolutely stowed out,
mm,
and give me a ring on Wednesday. And then went their own separate ways, and he rang her half an hour later.
mhm,
Now that is like at the time, right?
mhm,
At the time, she's like, "Oh, that's lovely. He's really into me. He's
mm,
really into me. This is
mhm.
fantastic." Actually, that was him crossing a boundary,
Yeah, yeah.
and it looked like it was really, he was really into her, and he was. I mean, he was, but he still was crossing a boundary, and he did
Mhm,
something specifically that she told him not to do.
mm.
Now, people are going to look at me and go, "She is crazy." He gave her a ring. That's romantic. Crossing boundaries is not romantic because
Yeah,
they cross
this
one and
I
you do
can't live
nothing.
without you another minute is for
Run
me.
away,
I've always felt really frightened about that.
run.
This thing that what do you mean you can't live without me? Fucking hell, I have so many things in my life. I can't just be here
Totally.
to make sure that you're not going to die. Because
Yeah,
that's what you're saying, right? You
totally.
can't live
Yeah, yeah,
without me. So if I'm not there, you die. I can't be responsible for that. I don't want that. It frightens me. It's
yeah, yeah.
not romantic. It's freaky for me.
It's freaky. It's freaky. I'll tell you the story. My husband last week, we're reviewing our life insurance policies. And he said, I've got to do this and you've got to do this. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And then he said to me, what if I die? What would you do? And I went, oh, just get another one. And he was like, "What?" And I was like, I'm joking. I wouldn't, But really, I don't live for my husband. My husband doesn't live for me. We live like, we have things, we do things. And if he did die, I'd be devastated. But my life would continue.
Of course.
I don't live. I wouldn't want him thinking that I couldn't live without him. That's
Mm.
terrible. That's terrible for me to put it on him. If I
Yeah,
said I can't live
exactly.
without
Yeah.
you,
I mean, the only
I'm sick.
person that I would accept would say to me or mean to me, I can't live without you, is a baby under 6 months. Literally,
Totally.
yeah, cannot live without an adult, a mother probably, but any adult taking care
Yeah,
because they can't feed themselves. But
yeah,
after that, no, please,
yeah,
I
yeah.
would
But
miss you
it's
terribly if you were dead, yes.
I would
Or
miss
if
him
you left
terribly if he
me,
was dead. Who
yes.
would do the dishes and the laundry? No, no,
We
actually,
live
that
in
that bit's true.
a similar fashion. I've been married for 40 something years now. Oh my God. And yeah. And we live in the middle of nowhere in France. Both of us, we know very, very clearly that if we were to either of us die or get a divorce or whatever, none of us would stay here
Yeah,
because it only works because of the both of us. So it's not
yeah,
like there's one strong pillar and the other one is clinging to. It's like
yeah,
we
yeah,
both built this thing together. But
yeah.
it's not, this creation is only existing because there is a relationship that
Yes,
is equal partners.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, what the fuck would I do in the middle of nowhere? I'll sell the house in 24 hours.
Of course. Yeah, yeah. You would it because it doesn't work for one person, and you know that. You know that. You don't say, what would I do without you? Like
I
that
would do
is
something.
control.
Well, the thing is, what would you do without me? Hopefully you'll find out,
Well,
the
you'd,
case
hopefully
arising,
have a very nice life, actually.
yeah, yeah,
I
and
remember there's a book by Joanna Trollope called The Rector's Wife,
mm,
and I read that when I was about 16. And there's a line in there that stopped me in my tracks, actually. It was, the rector's wife. I can't even remember her name. This is terrible. I'm gonna have to get it. She said, I am not the oars to his boat. I'm a separate boat.
Mhm.
And that
Exactly.
at 16, that really hit me
Mhm. Mhm.
because up until then, I was like, I was kind of programmed to be getting married.
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
know,
no,
this was what I was. It wasn't even spoken about. It was just it was.
mhm.
You were going to get married and you were going to have kids, and then I was going to do
Mhm.
this, and then you're going to do that, and it was like
And
mapped out for
still
you.
today, many, many young women, if or young girls, if they say, I don't want children, society as a whole would raise and say,
I
what?
know.
You
What are you doing?
know?
I was watching something actually, and there's one of the I think it was one of the senators in the United States had said that the decline in the birth rate is most marked in very young women. So aged from like 15 to 20 is the biggest drop. And I was thinking, is that not what we've been trying to do for decades? And he was complaining about it.
Yeah, of
Young women are
course.
not getting pregnant. Are you joking me? 15-year-olds
Mhm.
and you think that's a bad thing? Like what?
Mhm. Mhm.
I know because I
So,
live near Sunderland. Sunderland here in England used to be have the highest teenage pregnancy rate in Europe.
mm, mm,
It's not a good thing. It's not when you're
yeah.
fully developed, you're not fully developed in your own bloody body, and then you have
Mm,
another body growing
mm,
inside of you. It's,
mm.
you know,
And then you have
it's a
somebody else that
toll
you're
on your
responsible
body.
for.
And then you've
Um,
got to bring this kid up, and it's like, it's not fun. It's
and as
very
we were
tiring.
saying,
And yes,
I think,
but
yeah.
anyway, I
Mm,
don't want my kids, and I've got three. Nobody talks
mm,
about that, do they? When you say you don't want kids,
mm,
when you've already had them, like give them,
mm.
you know, I love it. Mine are grown up. I'm a
So,
good grandmother.
um, how can we help people understand what's the difference between a normal conflict in a relationship? Because, we don't live in Disneyland. It's not a happily ever after situation. Even
Yeah.
in a healthy relationship, you'll have conflict. And then what will happen in an unhealthy, abusive relationship?
Well, people who are abusive tend to behave like children.
Oh, that's a good one.
They behave like toddlers when they're not getting their own way, don't they?
Mm, okay.
And the argument will be something along the lines of, "You're not happy with something. You say something about that when you're still safe to do that." Because eventually, in a relationship with an abusive
Yeah.
person, it
Mm,
becomes unsafe to argue back.
mhm,
So you have that disagreement, and then they will bring up something that happened weeks or months or years ago that you did that they disagreed with, and they will just regurgitate that old argument. And if there's no
okay. So
solution,
instead of dealing with the today
yeah, they
situation,
throw it back in your face and say,
mhm,
but what about this?
mm,
So I've done this actually with my husband. And this is years ago. And I probably would dump him for this now if I just met him and he did it. But it was like something, and he then said, well, what about that?
mhm,
And I said, and I just bring it back and I'll say, well, we'll talk about that in a minute.
mhm,
I want to talk about this. And then
mhm,
he tried to do something else and
mm,
say something else. And I
mhm,
went, I'm not talking about that. We'll talk about that in a
mhm, yeah.
minute. I want to talk about this thing.
Mm,
I
mm,
can't even remember what it was, but I remember this
mm,
thing going backwards and I'm thinking, why are you talking
mm,
about this other
mm,
thing when I was
mm.
asking you about this thing?
Yeah.
And it was trying to sort of like deflect. But
Mhm,
of course, I'm a grown up and I'm not going to put up with that shit.
mhm. Yeah. So this is one unhealthy conflict, red flag situation. I would say maybe silent treatment as well. So
Also,
if I go and complain that something is not right with me, and then they an abusive person would take it so personally and then not speak to me for a
yeah,
week
yeah,
or something
yeah.
without any
Okay.
explanation, just playing the
I
reversing the
think,
victimhood
yes, I
situation.
think the bottom line is the problem is never resolved.
Hmm.
However, they deal with whatever the problem is, because of the way they behave, whether they deflect and talk about other things or whether they just ignore it and just,
Hmm.
just ignore you, stop replying to your messages, don't answer the
Hmm.
phone, completely sort of ghost you.
Hmm.
This what you can see is the problem that whatever that problem is does not get resolved. And that's not how adults deal with
Hmm.
conflict.
Yeah. So basically, when that happens, of course, run. But
If you
also,
can.
Yeah, or at least, if it's in the early stages and you can feel that there's something wrong with it, the question would be, how can I protect my self-esteem? And I'm guessing it's all about trying, if you're still in that early stage of being capable of that, is having other relationships with other people so that you can kind of compare
Yeah,
in your head
yeah.
the healthy one, or, have some girlfriends.
Definitely have girlfriends. You should never underestimate the importance of feminine connection.
Mm.
But also, if you look at what's happening and think, if this was happening to my best friend, what would I do?
Oh, that's good. Mm.
Because if you love yourself like you love your best friend,
Mm-hmm.
or you love your sister, or whoever that special person, that person is, somebody that you love, what would you do? What would you advise them to do? And
Mm.
that kind of gives you a little bit of a distance to sort of look at it from a further
Mm.
away, so you're not like on the cold face.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And making sure that you treat yourself the way you treat people that
Your
you
best
care
friend.
for.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is something that would make you really angry, that would, if that was your best friend, what would you do? What would you say to them? And if that situation is something that would really upset you on their behalf,
Mm.
you know that this is not okay.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know that if you can, you need to. If they refuse to resolve issues, this is just another form of emotional abuse,
Mm.
because they'll still bring it up. They'll never resolve it, because if they
Mm.
resolve it, then it's in the past, isn't it? And you've
Yeah.
learned,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't give them an excuse to further
Mm-hmm.
perpetrate you
Yeah.
in an
Mm.
abusive way. And so, if it's not resolved, there's an issue.
Mm.
If there's never a resolution to your problems that arise, and every couple has problems that arise,
Of course. Mm.
then you need to reconsider your relationship with that person.
Mm.
And
Mm.
we're talking mostly like teenagers. Like, once you're in it, the point of what we're doing is to make people see it at the beginning, so they
Mm-hmm.
don't continue in a relationship with that
Of course.
person.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in and you're sort of down the line and you're with them
Mm.
and you've got kids, um, get your ducks in a row and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
make a plan. But if
Mm.
that's not always possible, I mean, it's like I said at the beginning, why don't these people, you can't leave. It's really hard to leave. I left a marriage when I had two kids, and they were still quite little. They were 7 and 9,
Mm.
and it was the scariest thing I have ever done.
Of course. Mm.
And it's I was very fortunate because I could increase my hours at work. I had a full-time
Mm.
job. I could afford to rent a
Yeah.
property
Mm-hmm.
until things got sorted financially. I would say that these days, most people do not have that option.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Certainly
Indeed.
here, house prices are eye-wateringly high.
Yeah, no,
Rentals
and
are
usually
crazy.
you need two incomes to run a
Um,
household. So when
yeah,
you suddenly decide that you only, and on top of which, if I'm hearing what we've been discussing correctly, very often the abused person is by now in a situation where they don't have an income, or they have a lower income, or they
yeah.
have already been kind of become at the mercy of the
Yeah,
perpetrator.
yeah, yeah. And who's the gold digger? Who is the gold digger? Is it the person who stays at home to look after the kids, gives up her career and any
Mm,
chance of promotion in any field? Or is it the man who keeps his wife at home and he brings a wage in, but actually contributes nothing else?
mm.
Who's the gold digger?
For me, that there's a very interesting thing that emerges is about this emotional abuse question is whenever we've discussed the conflict or issues in a relationship, in a couple, um, if the only solution is who's to blame, I think that for me that would be a red flag. Because
Yeah,
sometimes most of the time it's not one person's fault, and you can't see the air quotes if you're listening to us on a podcast, but I'm doing them. It's not about blaming someone, it's about finding a solution to the conflict. Finding
yeah.
a culprit for whatever issue is not going to solve anything.
Yeah.
So
I really struggle with the concept of blame.
mm,
I think it's for the schoolyard.
Yeah, but you were
And I
saying
don't think
earlier that
adults,
abusive persons act like children, so I'm
yeah,
cool with
I
that.
don't think blame is something that we should have as adults. I think
No, I
we've
think it
passed
solves
that,
nothing.
and it solves nothing. Like you should have is a stupid thing to say. You should have, because we can never go back in time to put that right. So if somebody says you should have done this or you should have done that, they're setting you up to fail
And it's even
because it's
worse when
impossible.
the word should is followed by you should feel. So you should feel differently than you feel. This for me
Yeah,
is abuse.
that's abuse.
I feel the way that I feel,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there is no other way that I can feel or that I should feel because
yeah,
this is the way I
yeah.
feel. Because emotions
But
are
also
emotions.
it's about like wanting to control your emotional response.
Hmm. Hmm.
But then you shouldn't feel this
Hmm.
is a ridiculous statement,
Yeah,
you know,
it's impossible.
denying you your emotions, whatever those emotions are, because emotions are emotions. We have, as in a culture, we have apportioned a value to
Mm.
emotions. You've got good
Hmm.
emotions and you've got bad
Of
emotions.
course. Hmm.
That is nonsense. Emotions are emotions. It's what you do with them that makes them good
Of
or bad.
course. Hmm.
And people say, well, men are not allowed to show their emotions. Well, actually, that's incorrect because they're allowed to show jealousy, they're allowed to show rage and anger,
Hmm.
all of the things that we've been told are bad
Hmm.
emotions. Men are allowed to express
Hmm.
them, but they're not allowed to cry in a sad film, otherwise they get
Hmm.
laughed at. They're not,
Hmm.
they're all of
Yeah.
those
Hmm.
other ones are not allowed. Actually, stop apportioning. We need to stop apportioning value to the emotion and deal with. I feel angry. I have never hit anybody in anger. And I am literally powered by rage. That is my battery. That's how my battery works because I work in the field of domestic abuse and it makes me so angry. I am literally powered by rage. And I have never hit anybody in anger
No, me neither.
because I'm an adult. I've never, even as a child, I didn't hit anybody in anger. But,
Well, I'm going to
I
tell you a
am
fun
in, I
story
am in
again.
control of my actions. I might not always be in
Yeah,
control of my emotions. What put me in front of Little
of
House on the
course.
Prairie, I'll cry. You know,
I was 5 or 6 years old, and I went to visit my dad at work. He took me to, take your child at work day. We're talking the 70s, so hippie times, and my father was working in a weird government place where they were thinking, like sociology. And he had a friend there. When I arrived, so-called friend, a guy, he was older than my father, so he must have been something like 40 or 50 at the time. And he says to me, come with me, I need a child. And I'm like, what? Anyway, so he takes me in the garden and he says, we're going to do the screaming thing. And I say, what? And he says, I need to scream. It's going to be less obvious if I do it with a child. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to count to three and then scream at the top of our lungs. And we did that because he was angry for whatever reason. So we was holding hand, these two, 5-year-old and 45-year-old guy, and me, 5-year-old little girl with, flowery dress or whatever, screaming at the top of our lungs. It felt so good. I've been doing that ever since. Every now and then, when I'm really, really angry, I go outside. I live in the middle of nowhere, so it's not
yeah,
dangerous for anyone.
yeah, yeah,
And I just scream. If I have to let out some anger, if I,
yeah,
instead of kicking someone or hitting someone, or why would I? Trees are
yeah,
fine with it. They
yeah.
will
You can
absorb
scream
the
at the
noise.
trees.
Yeah.
The trees will have it. Like they'll hold you for it. Yeah,
So, just,
absolutely. It's what you do with the emotion that matters.
yeah, exactly. The screaming thing. So, just in case
Yeah,
you need
I
a
love a good
recipe.
scream. I like to scream into the abyss when I stand on the edge and I
Yeah.
just,
I don't have
yeah,
that, but I have trees, and they will be
yeah,
nice
yeah,
enough.
yeah,
Well, I think we've, kind of talked a
yeah.
lot about something around the emotions. This is a never-ending topic, of course, but I think for this episode, we've kind of handled the thing. The one last piece of advice, maybe, if you have it.
Stay safe. Be
Mm,
safe
mm,
because agree with, if you're not safe,
mm,
physically safe,
mm,
just agree with anything until
mhm,
you can get safe.
mhm, mm,
So, challenging somebody is one thing, but challenging somebody who's dangerous to you,
mm.
that's a whole different
Yeah, but before
conversation.
you even challenge anyone or not challenge that person, I would go for analyze. kind of do an investigation of how do you feel. If you feel bad, believe that.
Yeah, yeah. Trust your gut.
Mhm. Trust your gut. And then, of course, do not put yourself in harm's way. But when you have the awareness that this is not a situation that you want to be in anymore, you can then slowly and safely start to find a way out. If you don't
Yeah.
even know, because you believe the perpetrator
Mhm.
who says that you're too emotional, too sensitive, that you don't have a
Yeah,
sense of
yeah.
humor, or, you know, um,
I would say if you're not, if I were to leave, I can just get in the car and drive away. I can do that. I'm an adult. If you're not and you're not driving, if you're in a situation where you couldn't leave, you need to have that a trusted adult
mm,
that you can
yeah, mm,
contact and say, I'm not in a safe situation. Please come and get me.
mm, yeah. Yes, that's a good one. Thank you very, very much, Ree, for this
Thank
one.
you.
We have
Thank
another
you.
2 episodes coming, so if you're listening to this one in the future, you might already have those available to you. You will find all and every information about Ree, about how to get her book. Please get the book. Give it to any young people around you. Christmas present, Mother's Day present, Daughter's Day present, birthdays. This is really like it's one of those things that if any young person could have that available, if and when they need it, that's amazing. So do
Yeah.
that maybe. And you will find all everything about Ree below, above, around this video or audio, wherever you listen to it. Thank you so much, Ree, for being my guest once again. And
Thank
thank you to all the listeners. We will see you next time. Bye for now. Bye.